lot of changes over the last few years. So when I first started, we had a covenant enforcement policy. Senate Bill 100 passed in 2006 required associations, all community associations in Colorado, to have 9 governance policies. One of those was a covenant enforcement policy. So when I had started, all of my HOAs had covenant enforcement policies already in place. But over the time, with all the legislation that's passed in Colorado, the process has become much more involved than it was at that time. So first thing, I'm going to go over some of the benefits of the HOA rules and regulations. So obviously, property values. A well-kept community is going to enhance property values. Common areas, it's going to keep common areas well-maintained and visually pleasing. Also reduces the likelihood of conflict. The rules help establish acceptable property standards. Safety. So a lot of rules specifically address safety and security, which reduces risk exposure. Community cohesion promotes a sense of community and encourages residents to become more involved. The amenities management, I'm going to use pool rules as a good example of that. Amenity rules promote enjoyment of the common areas. And then, of course, legal protection. Enforcing rules ensures compliance with local laws and ordinances. Oops. The application of the rules and regulations. So you're going to find restrictive covenants in your declaration. Those are going to be broad restrictions. Those cover a wide range of areas, directly impacting the units. Lease restrictions, smoking, occupancy limits, property use, signage. Those are very common in the declaration. Other examples include landscape, parking, and pets, although that's usually written in pretty broad language. Oftentimes, HOAs will have a separate rules and regulations document which will expand on those. Restrictions in the declaration should be referred whenever possible. So what I usually do with violations is I will actually reference both a restriction in the declaration, and oftentimes there's some additional rules in the rules and regulations, so I'll actually tack those into the violations letter as well. You should check for any restrictive covenants before referring to the rules and regulations. The rules and regulations, most HOAs have a rules and regulations document that's a standalone, although I have managed HOAs that do not have rules and regulations. They just refer to their declaration. It is not a requirement. The declaration. I'm hearing some talking. Is Aaron?
We are not seeing slides in the presentation.
Okay, just a second.
Online.
Can you screen that? Just share the screen.
Share what screen?
This screen.
Oh.
Yeah. I think Aaron might have used a different laptop for this. Let me see if I can share this.
Yeah,
I think
he
I
doesn't
have it.
it up.
All right. Yeah, let me see what I can find here.
I have the presentation for the homeowners online.
Is it on this one, Aaron? Is it this one?
It seems that way.
Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Okay. So sorry about that. Again, rules and regulations, standalone document, not a requirement. The rules and regulations that are established, they must be consistent with the declaration. Okay, so they can't conflict. And if they do conflict, the declaration overrides the rules and regulations. I talked about that in my presentation back in October, the hierarchy of governing documents. Additional policies which provide rules and regulations. You guys might be familiar with some of these. Moving policy, access system policy, pet policy, pool rules. You also have your ARC or ACC, DRC, whatever you call them, guidelines. And that provides process and procedures by which those types of exterior requests are handled. Many guidelines provide further detail to those maintenance expectations. So sometimes you'll actually find rules and regulations contained within those guidelines as well, which you can reference. And I just want to note that those clear, detailed guidelines are critical for managing single-family HOAs. Of all the types of HOAs that I've managed, single families are typically the most violation heavy is what I call them. And so it's really important that we have very clear rules and regulations and guidelines. Covenant enforcement policy. So all homeowners associations in Colorado should have one of these. Provides the rules and procedures for addressing violations in the community. Must comply with the current legislation that's in place. I'm going to talk about that. There are notice requirements within that policy, contact methods by which we send violations, fine amounts and limits to those fines, the hearing option procedure for that, payment plan options, which is more sort of collection related, foreclosure restrictions, and then additional enforcement rights. Senate Bill 22-11, or House Bill 22-1137, that's called the Board Accountability and Transparency. That went into effect in August of 2022, and that significantly increased regulatory compliance for HOAs. Among other things, it increased the wait period for violation notices. So what you saw before was usually a 10 or 14-day cure period. That's been increased to 30 days. It also caps the fine amounts at $500. Homeowners are also allowed to assign a designated contact for notices, such as a property manager. The management company is also now required to send compliancy notices. So when those violations are cured, we're required to send notice to those owners. Also, the violation letters, not all of them, but some of them have to be sent certified. The legislation's clear on that. Enforcement process differs between two violation types, so they have changed it. There's actually two categories of violations now, a health and safety violation and a non-health and safety violation. We didn't have that before. HOAs are no longer allowed to foreclose based solely on fines. You guys probably heard about Green Valley Ranch and all that stuff that was going on. And that definitely spurred this on, and it got a lot of bad press, and this was among the response to that. Also adds increased administrative costs and oversight to the covenant enforcement process. There was a bill, 24-1133, which went into effect last year. That was what they called the cleanup bill. And it did address some of the collection-related items of 22-1137, but it did not make any changes to the covenant enforcement.
What do you mean by that?
So there was an additional bill passed that made changes to the 22-1137 bill. So as part of 22-1137, that did not just impact violations, but it also impacted collections. So that bill that went into effect last year only addressed the collections piece of that 22 legislation. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
We've got one unit in our building that has consistently loud noise. It's music.
Yeah. I'm gonna talk about that in this presentation. If you, yeah. So the two categories, non-health and safety violations. There's the standard covenant violation. That's going to be a majority of your violations that are sent out. Again, there are variations to the policy, but the process is, typically, this is your process, there's going to be a courtesy or warning letter that's sent out. Most homeowners associations prefer to have that courtesy warning letter sent out. The notice of violation, that's through certified mail, requires 30 days to cure. There is an opportunity for hearing. Always include the opportunity for homeowners to attend a hearing on violation letter, just standard rule. It also requires us to inspect within 7 days after that 30-day cure period. That can either be the property manager or sometimes it's a board member. And then also there is a fine schedule. So you would impose a fine in accordance with that fine schedule if the violation's not cured. Let's see. The additional, if that's not cured, there's an additional notice of violations that's also sent out with another 30 days to cure. Generally the same process here, the opportunity for a hearing, the inspection 7 days after 30-day cure period, and then you impose a fine. Generally after that, you're going to proceed with legal action, or you can continue to send notice of violation. But again, refer to your policy, your specific covenant enforcement policy, because there are some slight variations on the violation process. depending on who the attorney was that wrote your policy. Yep.
Impose fine in accordance with fine schedule. Who sets that fine schedule?
So the fine schedule is provided in the covenant enforcement policy. So when your covenant enforcement policy was drafted by the attorney, that would have been your opportunity to make adjustments to that fine schedule. Now, there are specific requirements within 22-1137 which cap the fine amounts. So at one time, I had a homeowners association, I think, that had a fine amount of $1,000 by the time it got down to the fourth. That is no longer permissible. So you would need to reach out to your attorney if you wanted to make changes to that policy.
Okay, so we have a policy where dogs are no longer permitted in the common areas, belonging. But if we find out a homeowner violates that, can we charge like $50 fine, or is that specifically supposed to be in our covenant?
You're supposed to follow your covenant enforcement policy, specifically follow your covenant enforcement policy. So you would send a violation letter out.
And so we send out the first letter 30 days, and they have 30 days to cure
Mhm.
that violation.
Yeah.
And then what happens after that? We have to send another 30 days?
Yep. So, and I'm gonna get into that in my slideshow as well. We're gonna talk about some of the challenges that you're gonna have with what they call these non-continuous violations, where the violations get cured and then the violation occurs again, because that is one of the challenging pieces of this legislation. The compliance notice, again, I mentioned this before, but a notice needs to be sent if and when the unit comes into compliance. Again, refer to your specific HOA policy for any additional provisions. Generally, that's how you're going to see your policy written, though. Yeah.
In order to change the covenants, does that require a vote of the homeowners?
No, not to change the covenant enforcement policy. That only requires the board of directors.
Not the enforcement, but the policy itself.
That's the same thing, so,
Oh, okay.
yeah, so just to add there, this is different than your governing documents, even though your traditional governing documents, these policies, these governance policies are separate. A lot of it is based on the declarations that you have in place. Those would require 67% of the owners to approve to make some sort of a change. The policies themselves can be changed by the board. You want to also, probably get the enlistment of some support from the committee, at least letting them know. But yes, you would have to, the board could take care of that on their own.
Wait, I'm sorry, could you just repeat that?
I can try.
So what's the difference between,
Governance policy is there's 9 governance
Right.
policies that are set in place. The board has the ability to make changes to those. The declarations, right, would require 67% of owners to approve to make some sort of a change. It's very difficult to do so. Sorry about that,
Oh,
Chris.
that's all right. Oh, great question. Health and safety violations. We're talking about non-health and safety. Now I'm going to talk about health and safety violations. The categories for non-health and safety are not defined in 22-1137, okay? The HOA policy, you may have an HOA policy which provides specific examples. Generally, dog poop is not considered a health and safety violation. This is according to HOA attorneys. So a health and safety violation, a good example of this is I manage a building. We had a homeowner or some guests throw a couch off their balcony. That was a health and safety violation. Okay, so you're not going to see these instances as frequently as non-health and safety violations. Most of the violations that go out are going to be considered non-health and safety. However, with the health and safety violation, the process is shortened significantly. So the notice is sent, registered or certified mail. See your specific policy for the specifics. Residents provided with 72 hours to cure. Provide them with an opportunity for a hearing. Always do that in all your violation letters. After 72 hours, inspect the property to determine whether the violation still exists. If the violation still exists, you proceed your fine in accordance with the fine schedule. What you're going to find is the fine schedule for non-health and safety, or for a health and safety violation may be different from a non-health and safety. So you might actually have separate fine schedules for each category. Yes.
so the example you gave of throwing a couch off the balcony, in 72 hours, the violation won't have still existed.
Yeah, I know. And that's one of the challenges that you're going to have. Another good example of this would be a barbecue. you know, that could be considered a health and safety violation. So maybe a barbecue would be a better example of that. Someone with a charcoal grill on their balcony. Yep. Something that you can see at 72 hours is still there, may or may not still be there.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, bad example. There's no limit of fines, but the fines can only accrue every other day. So the fining is much more loose with the health and safety violations than non-health and safety violations. Generally, I recommend contacting an attorney if the health and safety violation is not resolved within the first 72 hours. Yes?
Can another homeowner report violation unless does that come?
Yes, another homeowner can report a violation. That is correct, yep. Generally, when a homeowner reports a violation, this isn't always the process, but usually within a lot of communities I've managed, complaints are forwarded to the board of directors, and the board of directors determines whether a violation should be issued. Management follows their direction, issues the violation. Hearings. So all notice of violations must contain an opportunity for hearing. I think I've said that 4 times. That may take place in executive session. That was a change in the 22 legislation. So you can bring that to executive session. You guys are limited on what you can talk about in your executive sessions. Hearings are included. The board may appoint an impartial decision maker to a hearing committee. So you might have a hearing committee. That may be the board. The board or the impartial decision maker shall render its decision and provide a written response within 5 days to 30 days, depends on the policy. So sometimes you're going to see in the policy that following the hearing, the board has 10 days, sometimes it's 20 days to respond to the homeowner that attended. And again, refer to your specific enforcement policy for additional information. Some of the pitfalls of the current legislation: many portions of 22-1137, specifically pertaining to covenant enforcement, are open to interpretation. There's no clear definition of health and safety versus non-health and safety violations. That's a challenge. Extended cure periods for violations with a minimum 30 days, so it just takes longer. It could take longer for violations to cure than before. Additional challenges enforcing non-continuous violations like noise and odor. Increased administrative costs and energy in issuing, following up on violations. Just administratively, it's a lot more work than it used to be. Due to language preference options, associations may need to provide translation services upon request, resulting in additional expenses. So if a homeowner specifically wants correspondence from the management company, violations to be issued in Spanish or Arabic or any language, management and the association must fulfill that request. Some of the common violations that I want to talk about: parking, non-consensual towing bill that passed in 22-1314, and a lot of changes. How are we doing on time?
Really should take it.
Okay. So I'll try to get through this quickly. So check your declaration for specific provision on towing. Okay, the association needs to be able to tow. They have to legally. You have to check your legal documents to do that. Generally, the association must provide 24-hour notice before towing. There are some exceptions: parking permits, handicap parking, fire zone, things like that. You'll include a description of the violation and state that the vehicle will be towed if not removed. So there's specific language you need to include in that notice that's posted to the vehicle. Take photos with that notice posted to the vehicle. They need to be taped to the windshield and driver's side windows. And there must be tow signs posted in the community. So some additional legislation passed last year which requires specific notices, signage to be posted on the property in both English and Spanish. All the towing companies are aware of these new laws. So if they're a good towing company, if they know what they're doing, they should know that these signs need to be in place before they start towing. Generally, I would recommend just checking your property to ensure that it's compliant with the most recent legislation.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
So in our garage, it says, will be towed if you're not supposed to be there. So that wouldn't be legal right now. It would have to be in English and Spanish, and there'd have to be 24 hours or?
Depending on how the vehicle's parked. I mean, yeah, if it's parked in an assigned parking space or, handicapped space or something like that, then you don't necessarily have to provide 24-hour notice. Yep. Common violations and nuisances. Nuisance provisions, you'll find them in most declaration. They're usually pretty broad. The problem with a nuisance is it's a very subjective term. What may be a nuisance to some homeowners is not a nuisance to other homeowners. So it's really hard to define what is loud music, because loud music is going to be different to who you ask. Other examples include barking dogs and then odors. Some odors don't bother residents. Some odors, particularly marijuana smoke or cooking odors, really bother other residents. So it's very subjective, which makes nuisance violations very difficult to enforce. Now, non-continuous violations, someone had asked me about that. So the challenge with this legislation is that most nuisances are non-continuous violations. So for example, if someone throws a big party and wakes up the entire floor at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, you can send them a violation notice, but that violation notice, by the time they get it, is essentially cured unless the party's been going on for the next 10 days continuously. So there's no way to follow up with an additional violation and fine on that. The violation essentially starts over. So that has been a big issue that's been brought up with the attorneys, and I think that has been passed on. There was some discussion of including some changes in that legislation that passed last year. Unfortunately, there were no changes at this time to the policy specifically pertaining to covenant enforcement. So for now, we are kind of left with sending these violation notices, but not really with anywhere else to go with them because they're not continuous. Some options. When possible, attempt to resolve directly before contacting management. That's because sometimes residents get really angry when management gets involved instead of the resident just reaching out and talking to them. Other times, I recognize that residents may not be comfortable with the confrontation, talking to them directly. So obviously that's at the homeowner's discretion how they want to approach it. Photos, videos, noise logs, odor logs, documentation of the nuisance is essential if a violation is going to be escalated. So if we're going to fine, we have to have documentation. We have to have testimony from multiple residents. We can't just have one person complaining about an odor or noise. We need to have multiple witnesses. Police reports help. We need to have documentation. Because what you have to keep in mind is if this is going to go to court, is this going to stand in court, or is it just going to be one person saying that, claiming it's too loud or it's too noisy? It's going to get thrown out. So we want to have as many reports as possible from residents that are on site. Other outside resources, code enforcement, police, expert opinion. Now here's the thing, the police are usually going to deflect this. They're going to say, well, there's a lot more the HOA can do. There's really not, because understandably the police are not familiar with 22-1137. We have our hands tied. Oftentimes the police will show up and say, oh, contact your HOA, contact your management. So it is challenging because our hands are tied, and then of course the police hands are tied because they are busy responding to other more urgent calls. Expert opinion, I'm referring to an attorney. I would definitely recommend reaching out to an attorney if it is a continuous violation. You may be able to get somewhere with that. Oftentimes the attorney may be able to draft a letter that can carry a little bit more bite than a violation letter from the management company. So I often recommend that with repetitive violations that we can't fine for. Encourage mediation between the parties involved. And if the HOA is named one of the parties, there's an additional dispute resolution policy. I'm not going to get into that, but that's another governance policy. Common violations, pets, dog waste, pets unleashed, and pets left unattended. Non-continuous violations, again, escalation challenges without proof. For dog waste or pets left unattended, usually we have photos or video. We have more proof than odor or noise. Sometimes you can get proof with noise. Options, photos and video when possible, DNA testing. You guys probably know some HOAs are doing that. Pet registration measures. posting additional signs in common areas, and then sending pet rule reminders. Common violations, signs and flags. I'm going to skip over this one just for the sake of time, but I would definitely recommend you guys reach out to your attorney if you do not have a sign and flag policy in place yet.
Hang on one second, I don't think we got that back on. So.
Okay. Essentially, this sign and flag policy, there was some additional legislation that passed in 2021. If you don't have a sign and flag policy in place, I definitely recommend that. Particularly if you are a member in a building with a lot of residents that like to hang signs and flags on their balconies. Implementation of new rules and regulations or revising them requires Board of Directors approval. Generally, I recommend forming a committee if possible. If you have homeowners that want to be engaged and have some ideas to throw out about revising the existing rules or adding rules to the homeowners' rules and regulations. A committee or ad hoc meeting, which encourages input from homeowners. I also recommend that. Questions to ask: does the rule benefit? Is it in the best interest of the community? Is the rule fair and reasonable? Can it be easily interpreted by residents? Is there any conflict in your governing documents? And can the rule be easily enforced by the board or management? Implementation of new rules. This is continued. Discrimination. So you have the fair housing laws, both Colorado and federal FHA. Definitely want to have your attorney review those, okay? Particularly anything involving swimming pools, things like that. Have your attorney review the proposed rules and regulations. They will also be able to identify if there's any conflict in your governing documents, if that's not something that the board or the property manager can spot. Refer to your governance policies for the adoption process of those rules and regulations. Generally, though, it's required that the rules and regulations are included in the agenda of a board meeting, and there's comment, and then the revised rules and regulations can be adopted. And then usually the new rules and regulations policy is sent out, whether that's through US mail, email, or a physical posting or website posting. Every policy is a little bit different, but you do need to share those documents with homeowners so they're aware of them. Communicating the rules and regulations. Here are some great ways to include the rules and regulations in a welcome packet. That's for new owners. I know CAP issues a welcome packet. A welcome committee. I have some buildings that have welcome committees that will knock on their door and share some of those documents or some of the information that they have. Request feedback from other residents on new changes to the rules and regulations. How are these new rules and regulations working out? Let us know. Homeowner outreach, combining the rules and regulations to make them more reader friendly. So I've done that before too, because what happens is, especially with older homeowners associations, you have years and years of different boards putting together these policies, and you'll have maybe 5 or 6 different sets of rules, and sort of combining those, cleaning them up into one document can be a really good idea because it's much easier reading. Blast emails, newsletters, physical postings, social media, Q&A sessions, tenant awareness. Ensure off-site homeowners are providing these. So one thing you can do is you can ask the off-site owner to obtain signature from the tenants stating that they have read the rules and regulations. But it's really important that the off-site owners are ensuring that their tenants are aware of the rules and regulations. It is not the management company's job to school the tenants on the rules and regulations. It's up to the homeowners to make them aware of those rules. That's all I got.
Fantastic. Thank you so
There's
very
a lot
much.
of information.
Appreciate it.